The views expressed on Science for the People are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
This week we're taking a look at two very different types of white-collar crime: financial fraud and painting forgery, and how we use investigation and science to detect them. Hello and welcome to Science for the People. I'm Rochelle Saunders. Jennifer Fiddian-Green is a partner at Grant Thornton and leads their National Forensic and Dispute Resolution Advisory practice. She gives regular presentations and leads discussion groups to raise awareness and strengthen practices to prevent and detect fraud, including identity theft, money laundering, corruption, kickbacks, employee dishonesty, e-discovery, and IT security issues. As an investigative forensic accountant and a certified money laundering specialist, she has worked both criminal and civil cases, testified as an expert witness, and led large and complex fraud investigations. Jennifer, welcome to Science for the People.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Michelle.
So can you first maybe give us a definition for forensic accounting for people who have no idea what that is?
Okay, and I'm asked this question a lot. So what is forensic accounting? Forensic accounting, it's really investigating the numbers, right? And it's trying to, I work and my team works, we work to understand the story behind the numbers, the people behind the numbers, and what really happened. And we know that the numbers, the journal entries, the financial statements, the numbers that are in front of us, if they're manipulated or somebody wants to tell a different story, we've got to dig underneath to understand what really happened.
So why would someone get an investigative accountant instead of just other investigative professionals like a police officer, a detective, or maybe a PI? What is it that you have in your skill set that those individuals probably don't have?
So often, myself and my team, we work with some of those kinds of professionals, so law enforcement agencies, police officers, investigators. In fact, one of the people on my team is not an accountant. He's an investigator, and so he brings his skills, and we bring our skills. So as investigative forensic accountants, we really understand accounting. We understand the numbers. We understand how they're recorded, how they're supposed to be recorded, what the rules for accountants are, and accounting is. So that's the professional expertise, the financial accounting, the business world, how things are recorded, how they're supported, what kind of documentary evidence, what should be there, so then we can take a look and see how that compares to what is there. So we're really working with many of those types of professionals. So for on a case where we're investigating allegations of fraud or theft, say, within a company, we might have to look at all of the different records, but we might also have to do a number of interviews of people. So the investigator might have quite strong interview skills and lots of experience, and so then the forensic accountant could partner with that person. Now, as a forensic accountant, you also have to understand that you've got to talk to people sometimes to find out the real story, the story behind the numbers. So we often, as part of the training, you have to understand interviewing techniques, and you've got to be able to do that as well.
So I do want to get into a little bit more detail about what some of these fraud cases look like. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what a Ponzi scheme is, and maybe give us an example of one that you've worked on or know about, or how a forensic accountant might get involved with a Ponzi scheme, or get involved with investigating a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, hopefully we're not involved, right?
Right.
So, but we do often talk about that. Really organized, sophisticated criminals will like to have accountants and lawyers next to them to help legitimize what it is that they're doing and really look credible out to the party. But certainly these types of things, forensic accountants want to be on the investigating side of it. So a Ponzi scheme is often, some of the different language used to describe it is a pyramid scheme. And we're seeing more and more of these. These have been around for a long, long time. And the very first one was, I think, I don't have the story here right in front of me, but the individual who perpetrated it, his name was Ponzi. That's why we call it Ponzi. But if you think of a pyramid scheme, if you think an individual, and often it's somebody who is highly, they're very they present themselves as very credible. They're very there's someone who is very engaging and personable, and they're reaching out to individuals and they're saying, look, I have this investment opportunity, and if you put in $100 today, I'm going to be able to, by the end of the year, you're going to be able to get out $150. And so you do that, and these can be quite sophisticated. There can be lots of terms and conditions and details about what the payment amount that you have to make, the interest that'll be paid back to you, how you get your money out, lots of glossy brochures, lots of stories. But in essence, your money goes in $100, and the individual who's paid that money in believes that they're going to get quite a high rate of return when they get their money out. Now, the person who's taken that $100, they've now made a commitment to give $150, so they need to go find a couple more people to put in $100 in order to make that payment. And for the beginning of these schemes, the individuals who get in early, they often get their money out with that high rate of return. And the scheme will only work if the person who's perpetrated keeps going to find more and more people to add on to the bottom of the pyramid. And the pyramid, the triangle always gets bigger. The pyramid gets bigger at the bottom because there's more money, and then the people at the top can get their money out. These schemes can go on for a long time, but as soon as the intake of the new money stops, any type of payments to the people who've already put in money have to stop as well because there's no new money. There's not actually any underlying investment that is generating this rate of profitability to make this kind of payments to the people. So we all heard in the news and the press the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. I mean, that was one of the biggest ones that impacted many Canadians, but it was led out of Madoff, out of the U.S. The one that has been up here in Canada, we have had our share of some of the big ones, and there's just so many of these, Rochelle. It is really I don't know what the word is. It's troubling to me that so many of us in our society are. I don't know if the word is, I don't think that we're gullible and naive. Some of us are, but we do want to believe that someone who comes to us and presents an investment opportunity, we want to believe that it's real. We want to believe, yes, we can make 25%, interest profitability. Those kind of investments just don't exist anymore, real ones. But we have had a number of cases here in Canada, and we, in the work that I do, we see more and more. We see many of these, and we provide forensic accounting services to some of the different police agencies, and we do the forensic accounting on these cases, smaller ones that are not, big enough to get a name attached to them and get into the newspaper headlines. And what we see checks and money payments. Usually they're checks that we see that are paid, from people like you and I, neighbors who live on streets that we know of in the cities that we live in, who are paying money to an individual who presents themselves as, someone who will take this money and invest it on behalf of the people who are putting the money forward and return a high rate of return. And what we do as forensic accountants is we trace the money from the alleged victims, the people who have provided the money. We trace it into bank accounts. We try to understand what actually happened to the money. And we trace if it was, did the person just take the money and use it to live their own lifestyle? Did they send it to a bank account in another part of the world? Like, what are they actually doing with the money? Did they in any way use the money to do what they told these people they were going to do? We have to have a really good look at that, because we can't, if the person actually does what they said they were going to do, then a crime hasn't been committed, right? We're not protected for bad investments. And then, as I said, we look to see if they've hidden the money away. And so we're actually tracing it into the bank accounts, and we put together reports, they're called expert forensic accounting reports, and we say this is where the money came from, this is where we trace the money into, here's what actually happened to the money, and we end up telling the story. So some of the cases in Canada, there was a couple of really big ones that were out west, and I think it was just a couple of years ago. There was one in out of Alberta. I think it was headquartered out of Calgary, and there was two individuals that had taken this investment opportunity to these people, and it came back that as many as 3,000 investors, not quite I think the headlines told us that over a third of them were Canadian, lost almost $300 million in this Ponzi scheme. So that was in the individuals who were behind it was somebody named Gary Sorensen and Milo Brost. I didn't work on that one, but we read a lot about that one in the press. And there was the Earl Jones one, which was in the late 2000s, 2009. I think it went on in the late 80s through 2009, and it was over $50 million that people had invested, and they thought that it would earn money for them, and the money's just gone. It's just gone. So always when I talk to people about fraud awareness and fraud prevention, we should never, as individuals, we should not give up our money easily. If somebody's coming to us and presenting an investment opportunity for, I'll take your money, I'm going to invest it in real estate, and give me 18 months, I'm going to be able to triple your money for you. We should just be walking away. We should be so wary. We should not ever give up our money easily, because these types of opportunities that are presented are often schemes, and even if there is some truth to them, why should we be giving $10,000 and sometimes we see the check amounts and it's so much more money, and I just want to I want to tell all of us, do not give up our money easily, because there's very few opportunities in this world today where we're going to be able to triple our money within a year. They're just individuals who are trying to defraud us. They have a different intent.
So you mentioned that you try and trace the money. I'm curious as to what that actually looks like, because quite often now, especially right now in the current day and age, money isn't always a physical thing that we have, like the paper and the coins. It's quite often just numbers in a bank balance, or numbers being shuffled via credit cards or debit cards or things like that. So how do you actually track money in a situation like this?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's one that sometimes we do get. We always get challenged by, and sometimes the challenge is very difficult to overcome. So, if for example there is a case and there are allegations against one or two people who either as individuals or through a company, a corporate entity, the allegations are that this fraud has been committed. It's a affinity fraud, or it's a Ponzi scheme, or it was an investment scam, whatever it was. And investigators, so usually these types of cases are criminal cases which are investigated not by civil groups, although sometimes that might happen, but it will be a law enforcement agency, and they're investigating to understand if there was criminal activity and there'd be criminal charges. So if that happens, we now know who the accused are. It would be specific individuals and specific entities, and those individuals and entities would have bank accounts or financial accounts. So it doesn't always have to be a bank account. It could be accounts with securities dealers, investment firms. So whatever type of financial account it is, we would want to have access to that. So through that criminal process, and the effort of obtaining, evidentiary information and understanding what the allegations are, the police would obtain search warrants and say, I want to go have access to these bank accounts, these financial accounts, and actually obtain the documentary evidence. And oftentimes the accused doesn't know that this is happening until later on in the process. So once myself and our team, we would have access to those, whether it's as a piece of paper or it's an electronic document or electronic data, but we have access to the information inside those financial accounts. So let's call this one a bank account. I can now see the money going. I can see money going in. I can see money being sitting in there if it's being held and not used, and I can see all the ins and all the outs of this account. And now I can start to understand and track and trace for all the money coming in. Do I know where it came from? Do I have the evidence on the other side? I know these people are coming forward and say they paid this money. They're providing copies of checks, and I can trace the source of the money. And I want to do this exactly, Rochelle. I want to know for that $100,000 that came in, I want to know the source of that money exactly. So I've got people telling me a story, but I'm also going to go to the bank bank or the financial institution or the securities firm or whomever it is and ask for the underlying documentation for that transfer of funds or deposit of $100,000. So I'll get the underlying source documentation and check it out. And then for all the money out, this is where the case begins. I want to know how the money was spent, how it was used. The alleged perpetrators of this crime, how did they use the money? Were they really buying real estate and trying to make a return on investment for these people? Or did they use it for something else? And often we find it's used for something else. It's used to support a lifestyle for these individuals. So we can you can all imagine from a bank account, often you can understand how money was used. Sometimes we have descriptive information in there, but we really go to the underlying source documentation, the underlying evidence, and we go get it from a party, from a source who's independent. So we want to make sure that it's not false, it's not a fabricated document, it hasn't been fraudulently prepared or changed or altered, and we'll often get that from the banks or the whatever financial institution, whatever it is, and we'll find out where the money actually went.
Part of what you mentioned there reminded me of the idea of things like parent companies, subsidiary companies, shell companies that we often will hear about on things like CSI or other white collar crime shows. But I realize I don't actually know what a lot of those terms really mean, or even if they're accurate terms that are used in the industry. So are those some ways that people try and hide what they're doing with this kind of scheme?
Yes. So let me try to explain it this way to your listeners. So we actually have in Canada, we have quite significant legislation. We have laws and regulations that are many organizations in our financial services sector industry across the country, across the world actually, have to follow regarding money laundering and terrorist financing, because money laundering is when criminals try to move illegal money and they try to hide it. So we have all these laws in place that our banks and our credit unions and our securities dealers and a long list of regulated agencies have to follow. And one of them is around making sure they really understand the ownership of corporate entities, because it's so easy for individuals who want to stay hidden, who want to conceal themselves, who don't want people to know who they really are, to hide behind companies and sort of complex structures of ownership. So if there's a company that has a bank account in Canada with a Canadian bank account, the bank in Canada has to understand who the owner of that company is. And if you took a look and you said, well, the owner of that company is another company, so now there's a parent who owns a sub. The parent company is on an organization chart, a visual would be the parent would be the parent, and the sub usually is called a subsidiary. So we've got a parent and sub, and we start to understand that there would be maybe some other companies beside the subsidiary. So this would be a sister company or an affiliated organization. And we start drawing a complex organization structure. The laws in Canada today, and again in many parts of the world, not all around the world, but in many parts, are requiring that bank or the securities dealer or the credit or whoever it is who's regulated for these laws that I'm talking about to understand who the real owners are. And when we talk about the real owners, we really want to understand the beneficial ownership. That's a term that's used, beneficial ownership. So I don't want to, if you tell me that company A is owned by company B, I still don't know who the people are who are sort of the directing minds who are making the decisions, because companies don't do things, people do things. So I need to always try to get to the level, I've got to get to the level of knowing who the people are who are driving the organization, the entity, whatever this complex organization structure are. So in the past, it would be easy to say, well, this company will open up a bank account, and that company is owned by another company, and this other company is actually, a company that we registered somewhere in South America. And so who are the owners of this company that is registered in South America? I don't know. Maybe it's another company. Maybe it's a trust company. Maybe we've got all of these layers and we're trying to hide who the real people are. And these real people might be ones who have an intent to deceive us. They have maybe they have a criminal background. They have illegal money, so they're trying to hide themselves. So we now have laws, and it's making it really hard for our financial services sector to say, well, you can't just have a bank account with a company. You have to know who your client is. And when we say know your client, you have to really understand who the people are ultimately. You have to have a picture and detailed documentation of that whole organization structure now. We don't live in a world anymore where you're just allowed to say, well, it's ABC company and I don't need to know anymore. They have to work to find out who the directing minds, the authorizing minds are. And the term we used is who is the beneficial ownership? Who's actually benefiting from having this company? So there's lots of ways to hide, and when we take on a case and we start to understand who the people are, right? Who are the alleged perpetrators? Who are the ones who are believed or alleged to have been involved in this or done this? And we might, are they the bad guys? Who are the people who have committed the fraudulent activity? We want to know, are they related to any companies? We want to do some research and find out, have they registered companies in their name? And we want to find out everything we can about them to try to piece together that story. So it's part of the investigative work that we must do to get behind all these companies and the complex corporate structural organization charts that are sometimes used to hide information and really hide people. And we live in a world today where we don't want people to be able to hide anymore behind these companies. At least not in Canada, not North America, not parts of Europe. There are parts of the world where there's still we don't have the level of laws that we have here today. Anyways, it's changing. The world wants more transparency around this rather than less.
So I'm curious, when we hear the word shell company sometimes, is that an actual technical term, or is that just basically like a parent company or a company that's just designed to hide something?
So a shell company would be used to describe a company which is not, for example, an operating company. So a company that owns assets, that has employees, that actually, has people who use those assets, pays people to use those assets to produce something, a service or a product, actual operational activity, we would never refer to that as a shell company. That would be a real company, a corporate organization that does things, produces things, has whatever it is that they do. So we would not call that a shell company. A shell company is now, it must have directors, people who would sit on the boards of directors. Generally, corporate entities must have a board, and there must be owners. So there would be ownership of this company. There would be directors, but it's not really doing anything other than holding ownership in another company. It's not really holding operating assets. It's more on paper as opposed to operation. So we would refer to a shell company. We would refer to that type of scenario as a shell company. And often we hear things about people buying shell companies. This is less acceptable in today's world than it was, for example, even 5 or 10 years ago. Going down to certain parts of the Caribbean or other parts of the world and buying a shell company, like literally, I need a company. I want to create a layer of ownership of these other companies. I need another company. I need a bank account, and I need a company to hold the bank account. So I'll go buy a shell company. And you could go down to parts of the world. I've never done this. I've never personally investigated this. I've seen the results up here in cases in Canada, but I've never been down there to do that. You say, I need to buy a company. And so you say, okay, well, here's a company. It was incorporated 2 years ago. I've got a couple of nominee directors on it, and a nominee would be somebody who provides their name to the process but isn't really or doesn't need to be involved, but you need someone's name to be the director of the corporation for the corporate filing, and you buy a company, and that would be called a shell company.
So how are some of the ways that people try and hide something that they've done financially or hide money, or maybe try and escape having to go to jail or having to pay back the money. I'm just trying to think of people who are more like classic white-collar criminals. How do they try and evade justice?
So if you talk about an individual who worked in a company who, so we see these types of cases, unfortunately, too often, who, I'm trying to decide which one to share with you. We can talk about the clerk who works in accounting, who receives the payments from customers and needs to record the receipt of accounts payable, accounts receivable, and takes the checks, the funds, or the wire transfers and diverts them to their own personal account. If $100 came in today to pay this account, but the clerk takes $50, okay, and the $50 is used personally, so now I only have $50, but that customer says I paid $100. So the next $100 that comes in, they would use it to pay to record payment of the first account, and then the second account would be short. So then this is like backwards pyramid scheme, and it's called accounts payable lapping. So what they would need to do is they would need to make entries in the books and records of the company that are hiding what's actually happening with the payments. Now, if you had, say, a different type of scenario, like say you had somebody who worked for a company and said, well, I'm part of, my company has to spend a lot of money on these things here, and I need suppliers to come forward and provide whatever types of goods and services they're going to do. If I have, we're building a whole, let's call it commercial properties, and as part of the building of these properties, I need people to come in and I actually build them out and do the renovation work inside the buildings. And I want to give the bidder, the groups that come forward to do these services are going to say, I want to work on the project, I want to work on the project, I want to work on the project. Well, if I'm really, if I'm the one who's doing this, I'm going to say, well, if I'm sorry, it wouldn't be me, it wouldn't be you, but if we now were somebody who was committing fraud, who had for whatever personal need or gain, whether they were desperate or greedy or whatever it was, whatever their intent was, negotiates with these suppliers as maybe they want a kickback for what's going on. I'll give you the contract. I won't give it to your competitors. I'll give you the contract, but I want a piece of this. I want 10%, or I want a commission payment. I want something. So we're getting a lot more transparency and a lower tolerance threshold, Rochelle, on kickback activity. We've got law in Canada around anti-corruption and bribery. Maybe you've heard about that. And we don't want this kind of activity going on. We don't want it going on in Canada. We don't want it going on in other parts of the world when our companies go to other parts of the world and do business. So I've had the chance to investigate many cases where there's been allegations of somebody who's accepting a bribe or a kickback, and we have to take a look at that whole process. Are they giving contracts repeatedly to one person? Is there something going on there? And is there enough evidence here that there should be an investigation into the person themselves?
So we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you, we tend to focus, a lot of our mainstream media tends to focus a lot on the crime, on crime that we think of more as real crime, so violence, drug use, that kind of stuff. But do you think we pay enough attention to white-collar crime and to financial crime?
Rochelle, I think it's getting better. But the short answer is no. I don't think we pay enough attention, and we are so sophisticated in our world today. And how we are structured as a society. And if you think about I like to call it sometimes the financial infrastructure of how we organize ourselves as a society, how we transfer value between parties, whether that's personally or at a higher level, the companies that are doing business, the entities around the world. And one of the things that I've had the chance to spend a lot of time on is around identity theft and some of the impacts around that. And given how we're structured and how easy it is for people with this criminal intent to perpetrate these frauds, to target us, to get our data from all the different systems and databases, and then use our data to commit these frauds and leave the weight of the crime on us. I am not satisfied that we are doing enough to stop this, to prevent it, to shut it down, to punish it once we can and do. We often the criminal cases that we're involved in, and the ones that we're not, and that we see, there is our criminal system is so fair. And I think it's fair. I realize that I'm biased because I've worked on one side of it. I've assisted one side of it. But it is so, the bar is set so high to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these crimes committed, and the level of sophistication and detail that has to go that we have to go to prove that is sometimes just economically we don't have the resources to do it. So these crimes don't go punished, I think, to the extent that they should or could, or so what am I trying to say that's helpful? It's much easier, and nothing is easy, but it is easier to sometimes make the case in a more violent crime as opposed to a financial type crime where we have the same rules for our justice system, and it's so I don't think it's being enough attention, punished enough, but I do think that it is getting better, and people are becoming more aware, and that the tolerance level for fraudulent activity is lowering, and people are no longer willing to just let this go. We've seen big things like SNC-Lavalin. We have criminal charges have been laid against executives of SNC-Lavalin. We have senators, out of our Canada Senate, who are dealing with serious issues and allegations regarding expense claim reports. We never had that before. And, the tolerance level on that now is very low. Like you can't do this kind of stuff anymore. And that kind of story, that backdrop, I think, has also being told and lived and experienced inside corporate Canada. Like this stuff isn't allowed anymore. So I think it's getting better, but we've got more to do, and we can. I think we can prevent more too if we put our minds to it.
Thanks so much for joining me today. Really, you have a fascinating job.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate being invited into the show and to share. And I encourage everyone, don't give up your money easily. Don't be very wary, be very skeptical. It's your money, you've earned it, and help raise awareness with your friends and family, and ask more questions if you're interested, if you need to.
And if you want to learn more about forensic accounting or Jennifer Fiddian-Green, you can find those links on our website, which is scienceforthepeople.ca. Up next, after the break, I talk to Dr. Jehane Ragai, Emeritus Professor of Chemistry with the American University in Cairo, about how we use science to help us separate paintings done by masters from those that are forgeries. Stay tuned.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show and podcast that explores everyday life from a scientific perspective. We are a member of the Skepchick Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on science and critical thinking. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to support us at Patreon, to connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, and to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
With me is Dr. Jehane Ragai, Emeritus Professor of Chemistry with the American University in Cairo. Because of her interest in archaeological chemistry, she was a consultant to the American Research Center in Egypt Sphinx Project and has served on the National Committee for the Study of the Sphinx. She has lectured extensively around the world to university and museum audiences on scientific detection of forgery in paintings, and wrote a book on the same subject, The Scientist and the Forger, Insights into the Scientific Detection of Forgery in Paintings. Jehane, welcome to Science for the People.
Thank you. Thank you.
So is the concern over forgeries and the need to authenticate paintings a recent problem, or have we been trying to deal with forgeries for a really long time?
It's not a recent problem. Actually, it has been for a long time, but it has reached actually its crescendo recently in the last decade. And the reason being, of course, that the prices of art, as you know, have skyrocketed. You have a painting for Picasso, which sells for $50 million, a Jackson Pollock for $200 million. And so, of course, in parallel, in tandem with this, of course, the number of forgeries have increased tremendously. But there is also another kind of forgery, or not kind of forgery, but another reason. As you know, there are many Russian avant-garde artists, and with Perestroika, gradually, and the liberation of Russia in a way, not the liberation, but of course the elimination of the communist regime, many billionaires and Russian oligarchs were concerned of bringing back Russian avant-garde to their own country in order to preserve their own legacy. And in parallel to this, of course, because, again, the prices of Russian avant-garde art or paintings have increased so much, you find a lot also of Russian avant-garde paintings flooding the market. And so definitely, recently, it has reached almost untenable proportions. But in parallel to this, of course, the scientific techniques that were used to detect forgery have also become much more sophisticated. And the forger now, today, expects scientific investigation. So testing for forgery, in a way, becomes a test of the forger's ability, knowledge, attention to detail, and know-how, and, of course, to a certain extent, scientific knowledge. So, yes, to your answer, yes, it has increased recently, but it has always been there.
It's interesting because I guess when you sort of up the ante from the forgery detection side, it also forces the forgers to get better at what they do.
Definitely. I mean, in the past, the forger wouldn't be too worried about, for instance, the palette of the artist, or what kind of pigment the artist used. But gradually knowing that the painting might be, that forgery might be tested, they are very, in general, the clever forger is quite scrupulous in identifying the palette of the so-called artist and not using an anachronistic painting, meaning the painting that did not exist during the lifetime of the forger.
So you talk in your book about how detecting forged paintings in the modern day is part science and part connoisseurship. Why can't we just do the science? I mean, why do we need connoisseurship to verify a painting as an authentic work?
For many reasons, of course, and I'll give you a specific example to explain why. Generally, the connoisseur's eye can also look into the style because sometimes a forger is very meticulous. He can find an old canvas and therefore the date of the canvas can be old and therefore cannot really reveal the forgery. The palette he identifies, he finds a way of producing a proper craquelure, and craquelure are the cracks that form in a painting with time, and therefore he can produce the perfect forgery. But the style might be different, the brushwork might be different, and it is there that the eye of the connoisseur can identify that. And the specific example I'm going to give you, which I actually relate in my book, is the famous Mona Lisa. Of course, we all know about the Louvre Mona Lisa. But then, recently, I mean in the last few years, there was a Mona Lisa at the Prado, which was considered as a copy, but when analyzed with infrared reflectography, which is a technique that gives you the underdrawing or the starting sketches of the artist, it was noted that the corrections which were made, the changes that were made in the underdrawing, which are generally indicative of a real artist, were exactly the same as those of the Mona Lisa, so of the Louvre Mona Lisa. And therefore it was basically concluded that probably when Leonardo da Vinci was painting the Mona Lisa, the famous Mona Lisa, there must have been a student working parallel, using the same palette, using the same canvas, using everything the same, and even making the same correction in the initial sketches. Now, how do you differentiate between the original and the forgery or the copy in that case? The only way is the eye of the connoisseur. And in fact, many art historians and connoisseurs, because sometimes these two terms are used interchangeably, basically in that case, they all, of course, realized that the work in the Prado was nowhere as fine as the true Mona Lisa. So here the connoisseur is quite crucial.
So how singular or unique is an individual master artist technique? I mean, I guess it would be kind of like handwriting?
In a way. It's in a way. There is an approach also which is called the Morellian analysis, which in a way has been maybe not discarded, but has lost some of its importance. However, when it's used in tandem with scientific and with connoisseurship, is important. Now, Giovanni Morelli was an Italian physician, who knew very well the human body, and who was also very interested in art. And what he said was that each artist has his own idiosyncratic means ingrown technique in producing small details like a Freudian slip, in the painting, and producing the eye, and producing the nose, and producing the mouth. And irrespective of the development of the artist, even if like Picasso, he started with the blue and the pink period and he moved to surrealism, so totally changed, these small details remain. And therefore the connoisseur can actually identify these as a fingerprint, as you would call it, you see?
So I'm assuming then that a really good forger is also looking to forge that technique to try and get the copy past a connoisseur, as well as trying to replicate the scientific background story for the painting.
The style, definitely. Totally. I mean, sometimes we will find that the connoisseur, without the scientist or without some art historian evidence, can also be wrong. And here I will give you an example. There are the Meadow Flowers by Van Gogh. This was a painting which was assumed to be a copy. It was very large, much larger than what Van Gogh used to paint. It had much more flowers. The position of the signature was not where Van Gogh, and so the connoisseurs generally, said, well, this doesn't seem to be a Van Gogh. But then, when by the technique of infrared reflectography, by more sophisticated infrared reflectography is a technique that can see the underdrawings, all right? The sophisticated approach with infrared reflectography revealed in that particular picture that there were two wrestlers fighting, okay? Now, this, was not given too much importance, except when they looked at some of the letters that Van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo, and they realized basically that in one of the letters, Van Gogh tells his brother Theo, today I've painted a large painting of two wrestlers fighting together, which was actually the underdrawing over which Van Gogh painted another painting. So that was an authentication as opposed to a forgery in this case. But it was really the science in conjunction with the art history and not really the connoisseurship, which played a crucial role in such a case.
So if I'm a forger and I want to look at forging a painting, what kind of strategies would I take? What are sort of my big options as to how to pass off a painting as an original?
The general basically is the canvas, all right? The canvas needs to be timely. If it's supposedly a Leonardo da Vinci, it should be around the time of the Renaissance, around 1500 AD, all right? That's one thing. So the canvas needs to be old. You can find an old canvas and paint over it. So this is number one. Number two, you must make sure that normally you have the canvas, and then you have an underlayer that is normally painted white, or sometimes with generally lead carbonate as a white pigment, or later on zinc oxide. He must make sure that the underlayer is painted with a pigment that is timely with the artist. You shouldn't use, let's say, zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, which appeared much later, in imitating a painting, let's say, belonging to a Corot. All right? And then after that he moves on to the painting, the pigments. He must make sure that the palette of the artist, or at least the palette of the time, is what is it? What are the particular pigments that were used during that particular time, or by that particular artist? Number 2. Having done that, he must now produce a painting that he tries as much as possible to emulate the style of the artist. All right? So tries to see how he produces some of his movements, some of the faces, and so on and so forth. And the brushwork, because, for instance, Van Gogh used to do very thick underlaying brushwork, so he should be able to know the technique of the artist. And then here also, he must make sure that there should be a convincing craquelure. Now, what is a craquelure? Generally, when a painting is made and is dried, the pigments dry and they shrink. And when they shrink, they produce on the surface of the painting cracks that are generally deep, and he needs to have a convincing craquelure. And therefore, he could either draw it, but this could be detected by a microscope or even sometimes by the naked eye, or he could use a very thin pin, and that is a very strenuous exercise, or he can resort to a more sophisticated technique like the one used by Van Meegeren, the famous forger Van Meegeren, who experimented for 4 years until he finally managed to get a convincing craquelure that looked exactly like an old craquelure. Once this is actually done, he uses, of course, a binding of the pigments that is not, again, a modern one. And I can give you here some examples. Would you like me to give you some examples?
Yes, that would be lovely.
Okay. One example is the case of Van Meegeren. Now, Van Meegeren, it is said that Van Meegeren was a Dutch painter, that he was in his own right a good painter, but was looked in the critical eye, or was looked down upon by the Dutch art establishment, and therefore he decided to take revenge. And what he did was he looked at Bredius, the famous expert in vermeer of the time, and Bredius had predicted that actually that he would, that there was still some undiscovered vermeers, that they should have a religious connotation. And he also said that Vermeer had been influenced by Italian artists. So what Van Meegeren did in his preparing his forgery, he prepared a forgery of Vermeer which suited perfectly the prediction of Bredius. Meaning, he chose a religious subject. He went to Italy and looked at Caravaggio's paintings and imitated the arrangements to show that Vermeer had been. And he made a religious theme with very large paintings which were predicted by Bredius. But then he had also to produce a convincing craquelure. So he experimented, and he found actually that the oil of lilac, which was an oil which was the ideal oil to dissolve the pigment, could be used in conjunction with turpentine and other things. And but he had a problem there because, of course, the oil of lilac has a smell, and he was working in complete secrecy, even from his wife and her friends. So whenever they would come to the studio, he was afraid that the studio would reek of the smell of oil of lilac. And therefore, to avoid that, he took a liking to the flowers, and he had always some lilac flowers in his studio. And after experimenting, adding the pigment to the oil of lilac and mixing it with the resin which was dissolved in turpentine and putting it in the oven under 100 degrees, after 4 years of strenuous experimenting, he got a perfect gravure which could be indiscernible from that of the original. So, of course, when Bredius came and looked at the painting, which came not directly but through an intermediate, all his predictions were actually met. The gravure seemed perfect. He authenticated it, and he said it is every inch vernier. See? So here, in that case, the forger, apart from what I told you in terms of the pigments, the palette, etc., would look at something that would be in his forgery, would be convincing to the art critics of the time.
It's amazing to me the time and effort and expertise that forgers can put into their work. I mean, their copies of originals are fakes, but at the end of the day, they're also kind of works of art within themselves a little bit.
This is very, very true. In fact, recently the greatest forgery scandal was in Cologne, Germany, by the painter Wolfgang Beltracchi. Have you heard about it?
I have not, no.
Well, Beltracchi was one of the cleverest and one of the greatest artists, actually, as a forger. He forged thousands of paintings, modern painters, and so on, and he actually even had a perfect provenance because he invented a Jaeger collection whereby he assumed that there was this Jaeger who was a businessman, very well good businessman, and he said that this Jaeger had bought the whole collection of a certain Alfred Fleischmann in 1933 who was fleeing the Nazis. And he said and what made his story convincing was that his accomplices, his wife and her sister, were the granddaughters of this Jaeger. So the Jaeger collection was said to have been inherited by them. Now, I have a bit digressed here, but anyway, so he actually had a convincing provenance. But to address your question, Beltracchi was so clever that what he would do, he went to the galleries where the artist he was intending to forge exhibited. He went to the home where the artist lived. He tried as much as possible, this is what he claims after when he was caught and interviewed, he actually tried to penetrate the soul of the artist, and then he said, I wanted not only that, but in his oeuvre, I'm trying to actually fill in the gap in his work. And he created the most magnificent campendoncs, for instance, of Picasso's or what have you. One campendonc actually was bought by the actor Steve Martin. And he was caught. He was caught not because he was negligent, but there was just poor luck, because he had prepared his ground layer with some zinc oxide, which was basically used by Campendonc, but he didn't realize that it was slightly adulterated by titanium dioxide. And when this was analyzed in a very sophisticated manner by certain Nicola Easthoff in London, who has a very good lab, he discovered this titanium dioxide, which actually uncovered all the scam. But what we could say is that Beltracchi and others, in their own way, are creative. It is an act of creativity to produce a forgery in the style, but it's not a copy. It's a new creation, and in the style of the artist which is being forged.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how some of the scientific techniques that we think about as being used to detect forgeries can also help us understand better the process or the strategies or the techniques the artists use. Because sometimes, while we're trying to figure out whether they're authentic or not, it can also be revealed some of the techniques that they used. For example, some of the underdrawings, which I find really fascinating as well.
Yes, of course, definitely. I mean, you can definitely discover, for instance, I will tell you, if some of the artists do paint wet on wet, all right? they paint one layer, and then before waiting that layer has dried, they paint another layer on top, and then another, and they produce a mixture of colors and what have you. Fine. Other artists prefer drying and then producing wet on dry. And the scientific technique, which is quite simple because it's the optical microscope you use, and you have a cross-section, you analyze, you can, using an optical microscope or maybe even an ultraviolet spectroscope, which gives you maybe a better image, you can see if there is a separation between the layers of this cross-section that is clear-cut, therefore it was wet on dry. If there is a very diffuse layer between the two, it's wet on wet. So this, at least, that's the alpha of looking into one of the techniques that is used by one particular artist as opposed to another artist. Another idea also is, for instance, there is this famous Spanish painter, Sorolla, who is very much like the Impressionistic painters. He's very well known in Spain. An analysis was made of one of his paintings, and which was thought to be his, but it wasn't very sure. And then 50 other paintings were thoroughly analyzed by a technique known as X-ray fluorescence that gives you the amount of elements which were used in a particular painting. And it was found out that generally he used a certain amount of zinc in all the paintings. If that particular painting contains the same palette and everything, but a much larger amount of zinc in the mixture, therefore it is not a Sorolla. So by determining the relative amounts of paintings, of the relative amounts of elements, you can also get to know something about the artist. Apart from the technique, you can also use some of the scientific techniques to determine the ore from which the pigment was extracted. The manufacturing, this is a bit more difficult, but you can actually, from the lead, determine what, and this was done in one of the authentications that I'm describing in the book, of a painting by Vermeer Saint Praxedis, where you can get to know exactly from where the lead, as lead carbonate, was extracted, and therefore if in two paintings it's exactly the same ore, it must be, if you're comparing one painting that is of an unknown with one that is supposed to be by the artist, and comparing, and you get exactly the same place of extraction, the same kind of lead that was used, therefore this is an authentication process. Furthermore, of course, by looking closely, you can see, by looking at with an optical microscope, magnification even of 60 times only, you can get to know the type of brushstroke and the style. And if we can go even more sophisticated, we can use some digital techniques to look into the formation of the eyes and so on, as this Pascal Cotte in France recently did. You can get to know exactly the approach in making an eye by using an imaging technique that is extremely sophisticated. The one he uses multispectral imaging.
Jehane, I would love to talk to you about this for hours because I'm a painting forgery story junkie, but at some point we're going to run out of time.
I know.
So thank you so much for being here.
Actually, your questions were intelligent.
Why, thank you.
So I'm pleased about that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
I hope I was helpful.
Yes, very helpful. And it's a really fascinating topic, and I really enjoyed the book. So thank you so much. And if you want to know more about Jehane Ragai or her book, The Scientist and the Forger, Insights into the Scientific Detection of Forgery in Paintings, we have links available for you to click on our website, which is scienceforthepeople.ca. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Science for the People.
Science for the People is produced by Rochelle Saunders and edited by Ryan Bromsgrove. Helen Quivalon is our publishing liaison. We get research help from Josh Whitten. Coordination and additional behind-the-scenes support comes from the enthusiastic Skeptic Network team. Our theme song was written and recorded by Fractal Pattern, and its title is Binary Consequence. Science for the People is listener-supported. You can find us on Patreon, where you can support us with monthly donations in any amount. In return, we regularly post special patron-only extra content and after-show casual conversations with guests. This show is created in partnership with the Skeptic Network, a collection of blogs, podcasts, and video content focusing on the intersection of science, popular culture, politics, and social justice. You can find out more about Skeptic at skeptic.org. The show is hosted by Rochelle Saunders and me, Desiree Schell.